and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. And this, of course, is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. We'll be taking a look at how media reports monarchies. We'll also be heading to Tanzania to unpack the president's legacy, particularly with his relationship, the late president's relationship with the media. And our News in History feature, well, we take you back to the first ever Human Rights Day celebrations or commemorations in South Africa. So that's the show, but remember you can engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle hashtag SABC Media Monitor. Hashtag SABC Media Monitor. You can also share your views with us via WhatsApp, and the number is 065 862 4548. Okay, before we get into our highlighted stories on the program, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers. And we start with the City Press. Which paper should we start with? Let's start with the Sunday Times. This is the Sunday Times. And this is the front page of the Sunday Times, the race for the Zulu crown as the kings will stay secret. And this can take some time traditionally. Sometimes it can take 2-3 years depending on the situation, but perhaps this one might take a shorter time. Usually it's from the great wife, whoever the great wife might be. It's not necessarily the first wife, but there's one that is designated, and there is only one actually that is of royal blood. So it's quite likely to come from her household. The Sunday Independent is leading with a story about the actions of Zulu warriors at the funeral of the late King Goodwill Zwelithini, which forced the police to whisk away President Cyril Ramaphosa through the back door for safety reasons. They say it was meant to embarrass and send a warning to him that he was not welcome in KwaZulu-Natal until he smoked the peace pipe with former President Jacob Zuma, and that's according to the paper's sources. The Police Minister Begitele, however, denies that the president was in any danger, labeling anything to the contrary as fake news. The Sunday Tribune is running the same story, again with the denial that the president was in any danger from the amabuto at the king's funeral. The police were allegedly forced to cut the mesh wire fence of the royal palace to make way for the president's motorcade after angry warriors charged towards the venue of the king's memorial service in protest against the decision to deny them access to the proceedings for COVID-19 lockdown regulation reasons. The Weekend Argus on Sunday, in fact the Sunday World, let's take a look at that. And the Sunday World is reporting the fallout between President Cyril Ramaphosa and the governing party's Secretary General, Ace Magashule, which seems to have taken a turn for the worse according to the paper. This in the wake of the instruction by the party's top officials to its MPs to vote in favor of the investigation into the Public Protector's fitness to hold office. The paper says the deployment of the party's chairman, Gwede Mantashe, on Tuesday, instead of Magashule to instruct the ANC MPs how to vote, has widened the rift between the two powerful leaders. Now, March has been a difficult month for some royal families. The British royal family dealing with embarrassing revelations from one of their own. And here at home, His Majesty King Goodwill Zwelithini, King of the Zulu Nation, died. Now, the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, and his wife Meghan Markle made headlines for giving a joint interview with American TV personality Oprah Winfrey. Revelations in that interview about race and other issues created a media storm around the world and generated some embarrassment for Buckingham Palace. Prince Harry and his wife have long complained about how the media have reported on them. Meanwhile, here at home, King Goodwill Zwelithini died from COVID-19 complications, and whilst the order of the day was paying tributes and the singing of his praises, one journalist this week kicked up a storm saying that the platitudes to the king were all lies. Now, both these events have raised some interesting questions about how monarchies are covered by journalists. Here at home, do we do enough to tell the stories both in South Africa and across the continent and beyond? And how did those stories get told? Well, City Press Editor-in-Chief Mondli Makanya received quite a bit of a backlash for his opinion piece that he penned, King Goodwill Zwelithini, Apartheid's Useful Idiot. Well, to discuss this and how monarchs should be covered by journalists, I caught up with the CEO of Frey Intermedia, Paula Frey, and Zweli Martin Dlamini, who's the editor of Swaziland News. It's been a sad week for South Africa and the Zulu nation in particular, with the passing of King Goodwill Zwelithini. But it's given us an opportunity to explore the idea of journalism and reporting of monarchies. It's an interesting thing that when we talk about the royal family, often we think about the British royal family straight away. There are kings and queens around the world, but for some reason, they have got the lion's share of the attention. Paula, let me start with you. Why do you think that might be?
I think part of it, Peter, is really a product of our colonial legacy, but also right now, I think that the British monarchy story really is a story about racism, about classism, and looking at the stories that have been coming out in the media. I think it's something that that audiences in general are very interested in, and as a consequence, I think media are also interested in that story.
Zweli, are people of Eswatini also fascinated by the British royal family? Is it something that also gets airtime there?
Yes, of course, Peter, even though it's not that much. In Eswatini, the attention these days is on the Eswatini royal family. As you know, that Eswatini royal family is an absolute monarch. So it has a direct interference in the political affairs. So I think that's why more attention is given to them, particularly by journalists.
All right, let's come back to Africa now, because one of the things that, and I'm going to ask you as the media, is we have kings and queens across the continent. And I wonder if it's a failing by the media that a lot of us don't know the kings and queens in Uganda, the kings and queens in Ghana, and other parts of the continent. Who's to blame for that, Paula?
So, I mean, generally, I think that Africa does a really bad job of covering Africa. And it's not just that we don't know the kings and queens of other countries, but I mean, very often we don't know what the big stories are in those countries, etc. And I really think that when it comes to monarchies, they're two different kinds of stories. On the one hand, with the British monarchy, for example, you have a story that is largely covered by the tabloids, one that is driven by the celebrity of the monarchy, one that is driven by the celebrity of the people within the British royal family. And I think that in itself is something that is cause for reflection in terms of how we do those stories. But I think there's another critical story. I think that if you are in fact being funded by taxpayers, whether they tax whether it's a South African royal family or a British royal family, I think the people in that country have a right for a certain bit of scrutiny in your life based on the fact that it is in the public interest to see what is happening with public spent monies. And so I think that when we're looking at the way we cover royal families just generally, I think we need to be mindful that at the one hand, there is a basic need to be understanding from a public interest point of view how our taxpayer funds are being spent. And then on the other hand, there is also the scrutiny and sometimes an unnecessarily and unethical scrutiny that comes with the celebrity of monarchies.
Zweli, Are the royal families in other countries covered adequately in Eswatini, or again, is it very inward looking and looking just at King Mswati?
I don't think so, Peter. I think as journalists, we need to understand that it's not only about politics. You know, in Eswatini, King Mswati is receiving a massive coverage because of his involvement in politics. But there is also the cultural aspect that reflects our true identity as Africans. I think that should be covered as well, because stories that are surrounding monarchies is not only about scandals. There are those stories that cover cultural heritage, events, and everything that revolves around it. So those stories are also in the public interest, so that the people cannot lose their true identity as Africans. That's where we need to start polishing up, Peter, as far as I understand the coverage of monarchies as well.
When I think about the SADC region, for example, and if you've ever visited Mapungubwe or Great Zimbabwe, we had amazing kingdoms in this region. And if we perhaps told those stories much more, it may be that things like xenophobia may be mitigated, because there'd be an understanding about just how majestic our kingdoms were and how wide they stretched beyond the colonial borders that were created by the colonialists.
Mm. And I do agree with you, Peter, but I mean, I have to say it's not only historical. I think right now, for example, there are many stories of traditions in Zambia, in Ghana. I'm just thinking of some of the stories that I've read over the years that we don't actually make our day-to-day media coverage, and that probably would make really interesting coverage of Africa. It would show parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily see reflected in the day-to-day coverage, which seems to be very, very focused on negative issues or issues of poverty or issues of politics. And I think it would give a much more nuanced view of who we are as Africans. So I think it's not just historically, but I think right now we could have some really interesting stories that can be told.
Zweli, let's come to Eswatini, because there's certainly no shortage of coverage for the royal family there. But the coverage has to be positive, or can you sometimes write what you like?
Yeah, that's the problem, Peter, in Eswatini, because King Mswati expects a journalist to always report positively about him, yet he's directly involved in the political affairs of the country. So it's impossible, because as a head of state who is directly involved in politics, there are issues of accountability. You know, the fundamental role of the media is to demand accountability and promote transparency in the public administration. And as journalists, we do so on behalf of the people. So in countries where you find that the king is an absolute monarch, it becomes a problem, because when you start questioning on issues of public administration and public funds, that's where you then start to be regarded as an enemy of the king or of the monarchy. So it's a serious problem, Peter, and I think it then wash away the fact that we, as Africans, we want to see kings as or regard them as uniting figures, whereby people will assemble maybe for traditional activities, and it's a good thing. But in Eswatini, you find that the direct involvement of the king in politics, it then creates controversy even around issues of culture, which is not a good thing, because I'm as a Liswati myself, I love my culture, and I need to, whenever I report with love when it comes to issues of culture, because that's who I am. But where you find that the king is now personalizing the culture as if the culture belongs to him, then it becomes a problem.
All right. Paula, Zweli mentioned something which is quite interesting, the political angle, the political element. The British royal family tries to be apolitical, and although figuratively they are head of government, but that by and large, you know, the Prime Minister is elected by the people and the Queen is fairly ceremonial. However, here in Africa, sometimes our monarchies do get involved in politics. And I wonder, once they do, is it then fair game for journalists to report it on them in a different way?
And you know, Peter, I don't even know if we have to wait until our monarchies get involved in politics for journalists to be able to report on them. And I don't know if I would describe them as fair game, but because I think that it kind of it makes journalism feel like we're out to attack people. But I think, you know, I would go back to the preamble of the South African Media Code of Conduct, which really says that the media exists to serve society, and that what it really is doing, it serves society by giving people, citizens, the information that they need in order to make informed decisions and to participate in their democracy. So for me, media is a very essential pillar of democracy, and it does so by holding people to account, by giving citizens information, by generally performing a function that supports our democracy. And so when we look at the coverage of monarchies, I mean, I think the people in royal families are human, and we're interested in their lives, and we're interested in who they are. And I think it stands to reason that very often people want to read personal stories about them. I think the media's role goes beyond that, though. I think what the media is really trying, needs to be able to do, is that when it's in the public interest, it's to be able to scrutinize their lives, to be able to scrutinize what they are doing when it's in the public interest. And that's difficult because sometimes it's so easy to confuse in the public interest with interesting to the public. And I think that very often we conflate those two, and that they might, particularly when it comes to tabloid journalism and the coverage sometimes of the royal families, not only the British monarchy, but also, I mean, sometimes we see it with African royal families, that the coverage is very celebrity focused, very kind of driven by personalities, etc. So for me, the issue really is how the media's work is actually guided by this mandate to serve the public as much as possible. So I don't believe that we have to wait until politicians, royal families get involved in politics before we hold them accountable. I think that if they are being supported by taxpayers' funds, if they are influencing society to culturally, etc., that the media has a mandate to hold them to account.
Zweli, let's talk a little bit about Eswatini again, because I guess one of the challenges that you have is that you want to report what's in the public interest, but at the same time, people are emotional about royalty and about their king, and they don't want to hear what you have to say if sometimes it's negative. How do you balance the emotions of the nation and news?
Peter, when I started, it was that way. People were emotional because the king had previously been portrayed as a person who is innocent, who is not corrupt, as a good man, as a good head of state. But when I started to write critical articles about him, particularly on issues of accountability, people were emotional. But now the people can see that this king must be held accountable. Even if you post a story, you see the reaction of the people, because now they can understand the role of the media. I think what happened, Peter, it was the media before. The media before was captured. Even now, it's hard to see critical stories in the daily newspapers. So then the people were blinded, and they were made to believe that the king is an angel, the king is good, when on the other hand, the king is benefiting on public funds and misusing their money. Poverty is high. So the role of the media in this regard is to make sure we give the people information where their money is being spent. So I think, Peter, now we are on the same page with the people. They now understand, and it's a good thing. we are almost there, because that's our role. People must know what is happening in their country, and they must know who is spending their money, where and how. That's the role of the media. So even if it started to be emotional to others, they are now saying, hey, this journalist is helping us because we are now aware what is happening in our country. So it also put us around being brave to make sure you tell your story as it is, so that the people can know what is happening.
You use the word brave, and Paula, this word was used with veteran journalist Mondli Makanya this past week. Some people said that his article on King Goodwill's Relativity was brave, and he said a lot of things that people wanted to say, and others really went for him and said, how dare. And so I guess it becomes a difficult thing, and I wonder what the issues were. Was it what he said, or was it the timing? Because sometimes in Africa, we don't want to speak ill of the dead when they literally have just passed away. What's your take about the controversy around his article?
I think that when you speak truth to power, I think that you are always going to upset somebody. You're going to always upset a group of people, or more than one group of people. And I think that the timing certainly did contribute to the debate. I'm so close to the passing of King Goodwill Zwelithini, and I think that possibly upset quite a lot of people. But I think it's really important, and again, here I'm going to be guided by the press code of conduct. It's really important to recognize what the role of journalism is. And our role at this point is to remember the truth and to speak the truth as much as possible. I think in Mondli's column, when he wrote, I think he recognized what he was writing and how it would be taken up. And I think he ended off the column saying it is not our job to whitewash history. And certainly I think that we need a journalism that is truthful, that is honest, that speaks out, that holds people accountable. I mean, in that regard, I think sometimes you have to do that and you have to upset people.
Zweli, it sounds as if journalists sometimes have to break with culture and just do their jobs. Is that something that you feel sometimes?
Of course, Peter, our role is not to please people. We have to tell the story as it is. But you will remember, Peter, that in Africa, as much as you want to tell the story, you must tell it in a way that will be understandable to the people. In that way, you need to first consider the time. It must be timely. It must be understandable to the people in the fact that when you tell a story about their king at the time when they are emotional, you need to strike the balance between public interest and cultural values and beliefs. So at the end, you need to tell the story. That doesn't wash away the fact that the story must be told. So our role as journalists is not to please people, is to tell the story. We need to give the people information as it is. What I like, Peter, about journalism, especially critical journalism, investigative journalism, is the fact that sometimes you upset the people. They can insult you, they can criticize you, but at the end, they regard you as a hero. Once they realize that you were telling them the truth, you open their eyes. So that's the part I like about journalism. You must be brave, tell the story. They will insult you, and they will end up agreeing with you. That's journalism.
All right, perhaps final thoughts from both of you, starting with you, Paula. Lessons learned so far, and perhaps what should be our guiding light in terms of covering the monarchy, and should we be doing more? Are we doing enough? And are we doing it the right way? I certainly, for one, would love to know more about the kingdoms in other parts of our continent.
I absolutely agree with you, Peter. I think that there are many stories on our continent that haven't been told. I think stories that would give a more representation of who we, a more nuanced representation of who we are, and give a vision of ourselves that we don't actually see every day. I do want to say though that I think that when we look at the way we cover monarchies, and particularly when we look at the tabloid coverage of the monarchy, that that there's a lot that we can do in terms of reflection and think about the work we do and the ethical shortcomings that we might have in covering the monarchy. But at the same time, I think there are critical stories that are being raised, or critical issues and questions that are being raised, for example, around the monarchy in the UK, around racism within the monarchy, about the way we, the language we use, the issues we decide are worth reporting on, and how we report on those issues. And so in that regard, I think the current stories around Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are critical stories in terms of holding people accountable. But at the same time, I want to really agree with Zweli in the sense that in journalism, you are going to upset people, but I think our guiding light really is to seek the truth and to report it as fully as possible, really to shine a light on the issues that need to be exposed in order to serve the public. And in that regard, we are always going to upset people, and that cannot be our guiding star. We cannot not report on a story because it's going to be upsetting to people. We need to kind of have the end goal in mind, which is to hold people accountable. It's the role of journalism in a democracy.
Okay, and Zweli, final thoughts from you. What should be our guiding light? And you are really one who understands the challenges of reporting on royalty.
I think, Peter, we must always speak the truth, write the truth, hold those in power accountable. It doesn't matter even if it's a head of state, is a king, as long as what he's doing or she is doing is of the public interest or in the public interest. But at the same time, as journalists, we must avoid reporting in a manner that discourage or scandalize our cultural heritage, because in journalism is a powerful tool. In Eswatini, it's not like we don't like the king, because we, as Africans, we believe we must exist the way we are. But at the same time, we must discourage issues of corruption, hold those in power accountable. In this regard, the king is directly involved, as mentioned earlier, is directly involved in politics. So there's no way you can avoid holding him accountable on issues of public administration. But in conclusion, Peter, we must have guidelines as journalists, particularly in Africa, to cover issues of monarchies, not all the time in a bad way, but just to make sure the people doesn't lose their true identity as Africans.
Now, condolences have been streaming in this past week across Africa and the rest of the world, in fact, after the passing on Thursday of Tanzanian President John Magufuli. In a televised address, the country's Vice President, Samia Suluhu Hassan, said the 61-year-old president had died of a heart condition at a hospital in Dar es Salaam, an illness she said he'd been battling for the last 10 years. As many have already began talking about his legacy, it's clear that he was loved, loathed, and even feared. He had a very difficult relationship with the media, as the secretary of the Tanzania Editors Forum, Neville, Meena, told me.
It was very hard because under his leadership, he was a media unfriendly person. Under his leadership, we have witnessed some newspapers getting closed down. Some of them have been denied to renew their licenses. According to the Media Services Act, once a newspaper is registered, they being offered the license, which lasts for 1 year. So the license is renewed annually. So that was a bit tricky, because once you go for renewal, the responsible authority they might revoke your license for whichever reasons, and that ends the story. So we have some papers here. For more than a year, they have not been published. Some of them were closed down even before his before him. They went to the court and they won the cases, but they have never granted the license to operate in the country. But like other businesses, newspaper business has suffered a lot. You know, some of them they have been closed down because of the financial problems. What I can say, we have more than half of journalists and half of editors are no longer working on their professional. They're out of the newsroom because there's no job to do in the newsrooms. And then here we have a lot of draconian laws and the regulations, especially on the the electronic regulations, saying that they're regulating the social media, those kind of things. We have seen some electronic media, like the televisions, penalized for heavy fines for what they have been broadcasting. And so we think that for more than 5 years, we were under fire and we get lost to each other because sometimes we didn't know whom to engage with so that we can move together. So we found ourselves scattered and everyone trying to look on his own way, how to survive in terms of running his own business so that you can make your life out of what you are doing. But depending on journalism, it was we were in a very hard time.
What was it that the president wasn't happy about? Was it any criticism of government, criticism of him personally? What was it that concerned him the most?
He was sick of criticism. He didn't allow any criticism to come on his way, whether from media, whether from civil society, or from elsewhere, even from opposition. That's why you find out that even the public rallies, political gatherings were banned. So whoever seemed that he was trying to criticize or to discredit the government's operations, we were in trouble. And here we have a lot of cohesive apparatuses, people working under his government, trying to clap down the media and clap down whoever seemed to be criticizing the government. And one thing I have forgotten that more than 2 years, one of our colleagues, Azori Gwanda, get lost, and the whereabouts of him is where to be. He has nowhere to be seen right now. No any investigation has been done, and provide any information about that person. So under those circumstances, some of the journalists has been scared, and they're scaring of entering even this profession.
Talking about journalists being scared and watching what's happening to fellow journalists, would you say that some journalists started to censor themselves? In other words, not writing certain stories or perhaps watering down stories for fear of reprisals?
Yes, the censorship is at its best in Tanzania. If a journalist like sometimes I get love when I see what the papers are writing about the issues, the different issues. And the one thing, what evident issue is when there's some rumors that the president was ill. There was no single news organization, no single newspaper, no single radio, no single television did write anything on the whereabouts of the president when there was a rumor that he's sick. Only our neighbors in Kenya did at least attempt to try that. The president of Tanzania is nowhere to be seen for so and so days, and people are just asking, but no anyone in Tanzania. We did write only when the prime minister came out and stated out clearly that, no, these are rumors, our president is in the office, is doing his work. So no one, when the president is doing his job, no, it's not supposed to report to anyone. And you can't question why he's not seen in the public, because he's not the one person, not a person to be seen in the Magomeni or in Kariakoo. Just mention some of the streets and the areas in Dar es Salaam, Magomeni and Kariakoo, that is, it's not a normal person. So that's where, at least now, the papers, the media came out, because now they had a balanced story, because only the Prime Minister have spoken something about that. But you couldn't see any media try even to air with whatever was aired by even the opposition, trying to ask where the whereabouts of the president, actually taking that as a story. And bear in mind that even the government officials were just keeping mum, not saying anything, until when the vice president, who now is our president, Samia, came out to announce the death of the president, and now stating that he was unwell, he get ill, and now after that, he has died, which is this former, in my case, I think it was not proper, because people deserve to know the whereabouts of their leaders.
I suppose the irony is that on the day that he died, there were still people facing cases of fake news reporting that he was ill.
Yes, yeah. Some of people were caught by the police, saying that they have circulating the fake news on the house of the president. Some of them were released on bail, but as you know, it has been confirmed that the president was ill and he has passed away. So I think those cases are going to die on the natural death.
President Samia Hassan is now the president. Do you think that she will have a different approach with the media, that perhaps she'll be a little bit more open and transparent and allow you to do your work? I guess it probably will take time to see change, if change will come.
Yes, first and foremost, Samia, at personal level, she's a friend of the media. I know her personally. I have worked with her when she was a tourism minister in Zanzibar. And the time when she crossed into the mainland, being a minister in vice president's office, responsible for environment and union affairs. But we also worked very close when she was a vice chair of the Constitutional Assembly, 2013, 2012, 2013, 2014, around that. As I have said, she's accommodative. She's a woman of principle, but she's accommodative. She can listen and actually agree or disagree with each other. She don't have such kind of grudges and kind of, she not fear criticism. At one time, she told me that I have been hitted the government severely in my paper when I was during the Constitutional Assembly. But she said, okay, it is okay, because yeah, that's how, when you hit a child and then we go back and see where we have done is something wrong and we correct ourselves. I see that kind of behavior in her, but you know, she was not a president. Now she's a president. And the president, being a president, you have a presence which is surrounding you, people surrounding you, which actually they can advise you, and they can even influence your decisions and the attitude. And the second thing, we know that those people who were implementing the draconianship under Magufuli, they are still there because of the government people. So the system is there. If those people are still there and still believing that what they were doing was right, it will take time to change, even if Samia might have a different approach. So changes might come, seeing policies or implementation of the policies around the political willingness of the president, but the people under the presidents, the people around surrounding her, they might make some delays to see the media prospering as it was before.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the issues. So we know that it wasn't okay to report about his health. How about COVID-19? Because he was criticized internationally about the way he handled the pandemic. So were journalists also finding it difficult to tell the COVID-19 story under President Magufuli?
How do you have done that? Because the president, when the president stands and say, when the government stopped releasing the statistics of the people who are affected and the death, nothing could have done from our side. What do you report? And you know what they did? We have only 3 spokespersons on COVID-19. This is was the Prime Minister, Minister for Health, and the spokesman of the government spokesperson, Dr. Hassan Abbas, and maybe the president himself. And these people are the high-level people. So, and they have told you that our country is a bit scattered. We have the regional medical officers over there, but they were not allowed to say anything since last year. But I have just seen recently I've seen a bit of shift and behavior on the government, some of the government officials. Some of them have started wearing the masks in the public, which was not the case before. And a week ago, I had a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Health telling journalists at Muhimbili National Hospital that the government has not refused to bring the vaccine in the country, but they are still investigating if the vaccine is safe, and if they will see safe, they will allow the vaccine to be brought in the country. And the same statement was also aired by the Minister for Health in Zanzibar, claiming that we have not refused to bring the vaccine into the country, but we are still investigating on the safeness of the vaccine itself. So it might now can see maybe there is a consultation within the government circles trying to see how they will handle this matter, because it is true that people are dying, and here in Tanzania, the name of the COVID-19 is not the COVID-19, it is breathing complications, you know. Somebody has died of breathing complication, and even the media have been propagating on that's not that, you know, someone has died on the breath complications. Breath complications is a broad phenomena. Breathing complication can be anything, you know. Even George Floyd in the U.S., the one who was killed by the police, you can say that he suffered a breath complication. That's why he died. So that's the term you are using in Tanzania. And but with Samia, I think we might have a step ahead to see things goes around or turning differently from what used to be during Magufuli's time.
Today's a really important day, and so we thought that we'd go into our news archives and take you back to the 21st of March 1995, and that's when South Africa commemorated its first Human Rights Day, and this is how the SABC covered the story.
First Human Rights Day was celebrated around the country today. Services were held in most major centres to commemorate the 1960 Sharpeville massacre that turned the country into an international pariah.
The killing sparked worldwide condemnation of apartheid and led to the banning of black liberation organizations by the National Party government. One of today's biggest services of Thanksgiving and reconciliation was at St. George's Anglican Cathedral in Cape Town. President Nelson Mandela was joined by his royal guest, Queen Elizabeth, for an emotional service. After the service, Queen Elizabeth visited the Cape Town City Hall and Commonwealth War Graves at the Maitland Cemetery in Epping. Her Majesty spent the afternoon visiting Khayelitsha and Langa. Shalpo reports.
On the second day of the royal visit to South Africa, Queen Elizabeth attended a service dedicated to Human Rights Day at St. George's Cathedral in Cape Town. The royal couple were met outside the church by President Nelson Mandela. This is the venue from which many freedom marches were launched in Cape Town, and the cathedral was packed with 1,000 invited guests. The lesson was read by Prince Philip from the Gospel of St. John.
This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends. Here ends the lesson.
In his sermon, Archbishop Desmond Tutu recalled the tragic shooting of 69 people at Sharpeville 35 years ago, but said since the election everything had changed.
Your Majesty celebrated your 21st birthday here in Cape Town. A belated but also precious birthday gift is our freedom, which we celebrate with you, ma'am. We are allowed in this cathedral to clap. It is even more wonderful to acknowledge our president, without whose magnanimity, his singular lack of bitterness, the miracle would never have happened and would certainly not be continuing. How?
As the sound of marimba bands echoed through the naves of the cathedral, the royal couple left for their next engagement. Outside the church, a small but enthusiastic crowd had gathered, and there were royalists aplenty.
I'd like to see the Queen. She's very special.
It is a special day. Because I saw the Queen and I was 8 years old. So I want to see her today.
There was a great deal of goodwill around on this first public holiday for human rights in South Africa. The Queen's Rolls-Royce in silver and blue colours next arrived at the City Hall on the Grand Parade. She was met by Cape Town's new mayor, the Reverend William Bantam, who is the first African to hold this high office. The Queen celebrated her 21st birthday in the City Hall, and revisiting the Grand Hall in which the 21st birthday dance was held must have filled her with nostalgic memories. In the A.B. Bloomberg parlour, she was shown photographs of her birthday party, and on the walls there was a painting of the battleship Vanguard steaming into Table Bay, with the royal family aboard in 1947. Troops from the Cape Town Rifles and Highlanders lined the cypress avenues at the Maitland Cemetery for the Queen's arrival. Now she was travelling in a Range Rover to fit the occasion. She was introduced to the guests by Deputy Minister of Defence, Mr. Ronnie Casseroles. 970 ex-servicemen are buried here, and the Queen had come to pay homage to their gallant service.
And that's how we come to the end of the program. Join us again next week. In the meantime, please enjoy Human Rights Day. Remember what it's all about, and also take care of each other. Please wear a mask. Bye-bye.